Why was it always so quiet when she stepped into a room, like the air itself didn't know what to do with her? The first voice cut through the operations tent without looking up, sharp, annoyed, trying too hard to sound important. What's the show pony doing this close to command? Someone move her back to supply. A few muted chuckles followed, not cruel, just careless, the kind that doesn't realize it's leaving a bruise. Evelyn Shaw stood near the edge of the tent, hands folded behind her back, posture precise enough to look intentional. Her uniform was clean, too clean, some said. Her hair pulled tight, her boots scuffed only where work demanded it. She didn't react, she never did. Then the radio crackled. Static first, thick, uneasy, and then a voice that didn't belong on their net, cold, accented, confident. We are tracking Spectre 6. Confirm activity in your sector. Repeat. Confirm if Spectre 6 is active. The tent froze. Maps stopped rustling. Pens hovered midair. Someone's coffee cup tipped, unnoticed, spilling across a folded operations plan. Eyes snapped to where Evelyn had been standing. She wasn't there. No one at Fort Greystone had used that call sign in years. Most of them didn't even know it existed. But the enemy did. And the way that voice said it, slow, careful, wasn't curiosity. It was fear. Her file didn't explain it. It never would. Evelyn Shaw, 36, logistics and supply technician, West Compound, inventory control, drop coordination, no disciplinary notes, no commendations, just clean lines and quiet consistency. She was invisible by design. They called her the show pony because it was easier than asking questions, because she looked wrong for the work she did, too polished, too composed. Someone once joked she belonged behind a podium, not a loading bay. The name stuck, not shouted, whispered, scribbled on lockers, muted into fake respect. She heard all of it. She just didn't correct them. Every morning she arrived before first light. Every crate landed exactly where it would be needed hours later. Medkits staged before medevac requests. Ammo prepositioned before patrols even filed routes. Radios charged, tagged, aligned like pieces on a chessboard no one else could see. A few older NCOs noticed. "That's not guesswork," one muttered once. "That's memory." Another shrugged, or someone who's seen it go wrong. The younger ones laughed it off. People who hide in logistics do so for a reason, they said. Washed out, couldn't cut it. Evelyn let them believe that. Because believing she was weak was easier than letting anyone see how much strength it took just to stay quiet. Sometimes at night she woke with her jaw clenched so tight it hurt, shoulder locked, like it still carried a rifle. Other nights she stood alone by the motor pool, eyes scanning shadows that didn't move, just to remember what it felt like to watch without blinking. She wasn't running from war. She was carrying it. And then came the mistake, a wrong folder, a misread name, a door opened that shouldn't have been. She stepped into the main briefing room before anyone stopped her. The officer at the table looked up, irritated. "Why are you here?" The room went still in that particular way, half interested, half amused. "Who cleared support staff into a Tier 1 planning session?" Evelyn didn't argue, she didn't explain. She simply said, "Sorry, sir," and turned to leave. But as she did, something flickered in her eyes. Sharp, cold, familiar. No one in that room recognized it. If they had, they might have realized what they'd just dismissed. Because Evelyn Shaw hadn't always been quiet. Once her voice had guided teams through darkness so complete it felt alive. Once, her call sign, Spectre 6, had meant something spoken only over encrypted channels, only when things were already going wrong. She had led Sable V through places maps didn't admit existed. She had made decisions measured not in success, but in who got to come home. Until Operation Dustlight. It was supposed to be clean, precise, hostage extraction in and out. It was. The intel was wrong. The drop zone was compromised. Comms jammed mid-insert. Snipers already set, waiting. Her team fought anyway. She watched her second bleed out, shielding civilians he'd never met. Another refused evac to buy time. By dawn, the hostages were safe. Her team was. She walked out alone, vest soaked with blood that wasn't hers, ash in her hair, silence pressing in from all sides. At debrief, she didn't deflect, didn't argue. All lives lost, she said. My call, my responsibility. She left command that day. Rank, reputation, identity. She didn't want reassignment or absolution. She wanted somewhere the noise would stop. Fort Greystone gave her that. And for 3 years, she let herself disappear. Until the night she didn't leave a note. No permission, no goodbye. Just an old rucksack, field boots, and a weight she'd been carrying too long to ignore. 15 miles northeast, Echo 7 Pass burned with gunfire. A recon unit had walked into an ambush, radios down, no air, no words left to send. But not all signals need sound. Evelyn moved like the terrain remembered her. Up the ridge, 3 scouts flanking, 1 wounded soldier dragging another behind cover. She lifted her rifle. Paused. The face beneath the cracked visor wasn't an enemy. It was Lieutenant Dorn, the same one who'd laughed, who'd written Showpony on her locker. Her breath caught, not with anger but memory. Dustlight screamed silence. Then she fired. 3 shots clean, final. She dragged him to safety, whispered once, "Stay down." He stared at her like he'd seen a ghost. And maybe he had. The ambush unraveled under her hands, suppression laid like instinct, movement fluid, purpose undeniable. By the time reinforcements arrived, it was over. And on an intercepted channel, the enemy said the words that changed everything. All units retreat, Spectre 6 is active. No medals followed her departure, no announcement. Just a silhouette fading into trees. 3 hours later, they found her wiping mud from her boots like it had been an errand. Colonel Hayes didn't speak at first, then he saluted. Not protocol, respect. Commander Evelyn Shaw, call sign Spectre 6. She said nothing. When he told her Dustlight wasn't her failure, that it had been betrayal, something inside her shifted, not relief. Permission. Dorn apologized, not loudly, honestly. She didn't forgive him with words. She taught him instead. The next morning a patch waited for her. No ceremony, just truth finally acknowledged. And when they asked her to train them, really train them, she said yes. Because hiding had never healed her. Standing had. And somewhere between dawn drills and quiet lessons, Evelyn Shaw stopped being a ghost. Not because she demanded to be seen, but because she acted. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence feel heavier after the radio went quiet, like the night itself was waiting to see if she would move? Evelyn Shaw stood just beyond the outer lights of Fort Greystone, boots planted in gravel that still held the day's warmth. The base behind her hummed with generators and low conversation, unaware that something had shifted. Not alarms, not orders, something subtler, the kind of change you only feel after it's already passed you by. She hadn't planned to leave that night. That was the lie she told herself as she tightened the straps on her faded rucksack. Planning implied intention. This was instinct, the same one that used to wake her seconds before an ambush, the same one that told her when a plan looked clean on paper but would bleed in reality. Echo 7 Pass wasn't on her assignment sheet, but she'd seen the recon route, noticed the timing didn't breathe right, the spacing was wrong, too optimistic, too neat, and optimism was a luxury soldiers paid for later. Inside the barracks, laughter drifted out through an open window, young voices, untested confidence. The sound made something twist in her chest, not bitterness, not regret, responsibility. She slipped into the dark without ceremony. The terrain rose fast once she cleared the perimeter. Rock gave way to scrub to narrow paths that forced careful steps. She moved without a light, letting her eyes adjust, letting the land guide her the way it used to. The night didn't scare her. It never had. Darkness was honest. It didn't pretend to be safe. Her breath stayed steady as elevation climbed. Muscles remembered what the years hadn't erased. She thought they would have softened by now, that the quiet life would dull the edge. It hadn't. The first distant crack of gunfire reached her before she crested the ridge. Not random, controlled, a fight trying not to announce itself. She slowed, listened. There was fear in the rhythm, not panic but surprise. The kind that comes when a unit realizes too late that the ground beneath them was chosen by someone else. She found her vantage point just as flares died out below, leaving the canyon in fragments of shadow. 3 enemy scouts moved with practiced spacing, flanking left, patient, confident their trap was closing. Evelyn exhaled. For a moment she felt the old hesitation, not doubt, memory, faces she'd lost, names she still carried like shrapnel. Dustlight had taught her what one wrong call could cost. Her hands tightened around the rifle. And then the hesitation passed. The first scout dropped without sound. The second turned just in time to realize something was wrong. The third never finished raising his weapon. She didn't feel triumph, only alignment, like a gear finally clicking back into place. Movement below caught her eye. A soldier crawling, dragging another by the webbing of his vest. Blood darkened the ground in uneven streaks. The helmet had slipped sideways, exposing a face pulled tight with pain and disbelief. Recognition hit her harder than recoil ever could. Lieutenant Dorn. The same man who had smirked at the briefing table, who laughed when someone called her Showpony, who'd never once asked her name. Her chest tightened, not with anger, with something heavier. It would have been easy to hesitate then, to let the moment weigh itself down with old slights, to tell herself this wasn't her responsibility anymore. But responsibility had never worked that way. She moved. Sliding down the slope, she covered him first, fast, efficient shots that cut off pursuit before it could form. Then she reached him, gripping his plate carrier, pulling him into the curve of the rock where the terrain folded inward. "Stay down," she whispered. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. He stared up at her, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing like he wasn't sure what language to use. "You," he breathed, "you're." She shook her head once, "Not now." The rest of the ambush collapsed under pressure it hadn't expected. She shifted positions, laid suppression where fear would travel fastest, moved again before return fire could fix on her. Time stretched and compressed all at once. When friendly reinforcements finally pushed in, they found a scene that didn't make sense. Enemy bodies placed with intention, a perimeter already secured, a unit shaken but alive. And no clear explanation. On the exfil bird, someone caught the enemy transmission. "All units fall back. Spectre 6 is active." The words moved through the soldiers like a chill. Dorn didn't speak. He just watched the dark tree line as if expecting it to move. 3 hours later, when they found Evelyn near the southern ridge, she was cleaning her boots. Not hiding, not running. Waiting. Colonel Hayes studied her for a long moment before saluting. The kind of salute that wasn't about rank, but recognition. Inside the operations office, when he said her name, her real one, it landed differently than she expected. Like an old scar being pressed, not to hurt, but to prove it was still there. When he told her Dustlight hadn't been her failure, she didn't argue. She didn't collapse into relief. She listened. Because absolution doesn't undo memory. Dorn came in later, arm bandaged, eyes stripped of arrogance. His apology wasn't polished. It wasn't eloquent. It was real. She didn't punish him, didn't comfort him either. "Next time," she said quietly, "ask where someone's been, not why they're quiet." He nodded like the lesson would cost him something, and should. When she left the room, the bass felt different, not louder, more attentive. The patch waiting for her the next morning wasn't an honor. It was acknowledgement, heavy fabric, heavier meaning. When they asked her to train them, she hesitated, not because she doubted them, because she doubted herself. Command meant attachment, and attachment meant loss. But as she looked at the young soldiers standing straighter than they ever had, listening harder than they thought possible, she felt something unfamiliar surface. Hope, cautious, earned. The first morning of training, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. They learned to move without noise, to think before reacting, to read spaces between threats. They learned that leadership wasn't volume, it was clarity. At night, Evelyn still stood at the fence line sometimes, watching the horizon settle into shadow. The ghosts didn't disappear. But they stopped whispering. Because for the first time since Dustlight, she wasn't hiding from them. She was standing where she belonged. And somewhere deep in enemy channels, a name went unspoken again, not out of ignorance, but respect. What if the hardest part wasn't stepping back into the fight, but letting yourself be seen once you did? The first week after Echo 7 passed like a held breath. Fort Greystone didn't change overnight. It didn't need to. The shift was quieter than that. Soldiers paused when Evelyn walked by. Conversations lowered, not out of fear but attention. The jokes disappeared, not because they were ordered to, but because no one felt right making them anymore. She noticed everything. That was the problem. When you've lived long enough pretending to be invisible, being seen can feel like exposure instead of recognition. Every look felt like a question she hadn't agreed to answer. Every nod reminded her of who she used to be and who she had buried. The patch on her shoulder weighed more than it should have. Not physically, symbolically. It stitched her back to a life she had once walked away from without looking back. Training began before sunrise. No speeches, no welcome-back ceremony, just cold air and tired eyes forming uneven lines on the gravel. She watched them settle into place, young men and women carrying weapons like they were still learning how heavy responsibility could be. She started with silence. Let it stretch, let discomfort surface. Then she moved. Not to the front, to the middle, adjusted a stance without a word, shifted a grip, corrected a posture with 2 fingers and a look that said, "Pay attention or pay later." They learned quickly. Because she didn't teach them how to be fearless. She taught them how to notice when fear arrived and not let it drive. Between drills, she said little. When someone asked a question, she answered it honestly. No bravado, no stories about glory, just what worked and what failed, and how failure almost always sounded like confidence right before it happened. Dorn stayed near the back at first. Still healing, still learning how to carry the weight of his own assumptions. She didn't single him out, didn't need to. Growth has a way of announcing itself quietly when it's real. At night, when the bass settled into its familiar hum, Evelyn found sleep harder than ever. Not because of nightmares. Because of memory. Training pulled old instincts to the surface. Muscle memory brought back voices. Commands she hadn't spoken aloud in years echoed in her mind, layered over faces she still carried. Sable V never left her. They lived in the spaces between breaths, in the pause before a decision, in the ache that came when things went right and she remembered who wasn't there to see it. Some nights she woke with her heart racing, convinced she'd miscounted again. That someone was missing. She'd sit up, grounding herself in the present. Concrete walls, quiet hallway, the distant thrum of generators, different war, different time. Same cost, A week into training, enemy activity dropped across 2 sectors. No announcements, no confirmation. Just absence. The kind that made analysts uneasy. Colonel Hayes noticed too. He didn't ask her directly. He didn't have to. He simply said, "They're listening." She nodded. Fear spreads faster than bullets when it's earned. But fear also sharpens attention, and attention brings consequences. The first patrol under her revised routes moved cleaner than any before it. No contact, no mistakes. They came back quiet but different, alert, grounded, aware of how close things could have gone wrong. That night, Dorn found her at the fence line. "Ma'am," he said, unsure if the words still fit right, "can I ask you something?" She didn't look away from the horizon. "If you're ready for the answer." He swallowed. "How do you carry it, all of it, the people you couldn't bring back?" The question wasn't disrespectful. It was brave. She considered him for a long moment before answering. "You don't carry it," she said. "You let it shape you. Then you decide what kind of person that shape becomes." He nodded slowly, like the words would take time to settle. A few days later, the base received a message marked internal eyes only. Redacted, partial. Operation Dustlight, new findings, confirmed breach, internal compromise, name still sealed. Evelyn read it alone. The truth didn't heal her. It didn't erase the weight she'd been carrying. But it redirected it. Guilt gave way to something steadier. Resolve. The past hadn't been her failure, but the future was still her responsibility. Training intensified, not harder, smarter. She taught them how to wait, how to read a room before entering, how to recognize when ego tried to take the wheel. She showed them how to move like they didn't need to prove anything. And slowly Fort Greystone changed. Not because of fear, because of trust. The soldiers stopped asking who she used to be. They started asking how to be better. And for the first time since she'd gone quiet, Evelyn Shaw didn't feel like she was borrowing her life from the past. She was building something forward. Still, there were moments, quiet ones, when doubt crept in. When she wondered if stepping back into command would cost her again. If caring meant opening herself up to another loss she might not survive. But every morning, when she watched them line up with clearer eyes and steadier hands, she felt something answer back. Not certainty. Purpose. And sometimes that was enough. What happens when the quiet finally starts to break, and you realize it was the only thing holding you together? The warning didn't come with sirens. It never did. It came as a subtle change in pattern, the kind only someone who'd learned to distrust silence would notice. Enemy chatter didn't spike. It narrowed. Patrol routes shifted just enough to look accidental. Supply convoys detoured around empty ground. They weren't retreating anymore. They were reorganizing. Evelyn felt it before the analysts confirmed it. She always did. The instinct had never left, only gone dormant, like an animal waiting out winter. Colonel Hayes called her in that evening. No entourage, no formality, just 2 chairs and a map that had been unfolded and refolded so many times the creases told their own story. "They're probing again," he said. "Not here around us." She studied the map, eyes moving without hurry. "They're looking for confirmation." Of what? That Spectre 6 wasn't a fluke. Hayes exhaled slowly. "They want to know if you're staying." She didn't answer right away. Staying meant permanence. Permanence meant ownership. And ownership meant that if something went wrong, there would be no place left to hide. "They'll come," she said finally. "Not loud, not fast. They'll try to make us overreact." Hayes nodded. "What do you need?" The question caught her off guard, not because of its content, but because of its trust. "Time," she said, "and permission to fail quietly." He gave both without hesitation. That night Evelyn walked the perimeter alone. The air was cooler now, autumn edging its way into the mountains. the kind of cold that crept into joints and stayed. She remembered another night like this. Another base, different country, same waiting. The feeling that something irreversible was approaching and there was nothing to do but meet it standing. The difference now was the weight of expectation. Back then she'd carried command like a shield. Now it felt like a mirror. 2 days later, the first test came. A patrol reported movement near an abandoned relay station south of the pass. Nothing confirmed. No contact. Just shapes where there shouldn't have been any. Evelyn didn't rush it. She sent 2 units on staggered timelines. Different routes, different packing. No radio chatter unless absolutely necessary. She told them not to hunt. Let them think they're alone, she said. The waiting was the hardest part. Hours passed. Then one transmission came through. Low, controlled. Visual confirmed, they're watching us. Evelyn closed her eyes for half a second. Not prayer, calibration. Do not engage, she replied. Let them watch. That was the hardest order she'd given in years. Letting go of control felt like courting disaster. Every instinct screamed to act, to disrupt, to dominate the moment. But she'd learned the cost of acting too soon. The enemy pulled back by dawn. No shots fired. No casualties. But the message was clear. They were testing her patience. Word spread fast among the troops, not as rumor, as reassurance. They trusted the quiet now because she did. Still the strain showed. Dorn pushed himself harder than he needed to. Others followed. Overtraining, over-preparing, fear dressed up as discipline. Evelyn addressed it the only way she knew how. She pulled them aside, not as a commander, but as someone who had already paid the price of burning too bright. Control doesn't mean exhaustion, she told them. If you can't rest, you can't see, and if you can't see, someone else pays. The words landed. Because they weren't instructions. They were confession. That night, she dreamed of dustlight for the first time in months. Not the chaos. The moment before. The briefing table, the confidence, the way she'd believed she had time. She woke before dawn, heart heavy, the old doubt pressing in. Was she making the same mistake again, trusting patience when action might be needed? The answer came sooner than she expected. An encrypted burst hit the base network just after sunrise. Partial decode. Enemy internal traffic. Spectre 6 remains in sector. Avoid engagement. Reroute assets. Delay timetable. She read it twice. They weren't just afraid of her. They were planning around her. Hayes saw it too. They're adapting. So should we, she said. But adaptation didn't mean escalation. She changed nothing outwardly. Same patrols, same routines, same visible calm. Inside, she sharpened. Every route reviewed, every contingency rehearsed quietly. She positioned her people not for defense, but for restraint. Because sometimes, the strongest move is refusing to be pulled into someone else's urgency. A week later, the real test came. A drone, low-tech, expendable, buzzed the outer perimeter, harmless on its own, provocative in intent. Soldiers tensed, fingers hovered. Evelyn stepped forward. Hold, she said. The drone circled once, twice. Then it veered away. No shots fired. That night she stood alone again at the fence line, the horizon darker than usual, the quiet heavier, but different. Not the silence of hiding. The silence of control. She thought about how close she'd come to losing herself to guilt, to letting the past dictate every move. But leadership wasn't about erasing mistakes. It was about not repeating them. She was Spectre 6 because she was feared. She was feared because she'd learned when not to strike. And somewhere far from Fort Greystone, an enemy commander crossed her name off a list. Not because the threat was gone, but because it wasn't worth the cost. What if the moment you feared most wasn't another battle, but the chance to lose everything by caring again? The call came just before midnight. No alarms, no scrambling boots, just a quiet knock on the operations door and a look on the duty officer's face that said this wasn't routine. Evelyn didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. A forward listening post, temporary, lightly manned, had gone dark near the edge of the canyon grid. No gunfire reported, no distress call, just absence. An absence she knew was rarely empty. She stood over the map while the room waited for her to speak. The soldiers inside were calmer than they used to be, not relaxed, ready. That difference mattered. "They're not attacking us," she said slowly. "They're testing our restraint." Someone asked the question no one wanted to voice. "What if it's a trap?" "It probably is," she replied. "That doesn't mean we don't go." The old version of herself would have taken point without thinking, would have put her body between risk and outcome, because that's what leaders were supposed to do. She didn't do that this time. She selected a small team, not the fastest, not the loudest, the ones who had learned to wait, to listen, to move without needing to be seen. Dorn was among them. When he met her eyes, there was no hesitation, just trust, the kind built quietly day by day, not demanded by rank. "You'll hold overwatch," she told him. "You see anything shift, you pull them back. No heroics." He nodded once, understood. As they moved out, Evelyn stayed behind. That was the hardest decision she'd made since Dustlight. Commanding from a distance meant surrendering the illusion of control. It meant accepting that leadership sometimes required staying put while others stepped into uncertainty. The waiting returned. Minutes stretched, then an hour, then two. Every sound from the radio made her spine tighten. Every silence pressed against her ribs. She remembered another night like this, another team beyond reach, another moment where waiting had turned into loss. Her hands curled into fists before she realized it. Then the transmission came. Low, steady. "Contact confirmed. No hostiles. Listening post intact. Power failure intentional, old grid, but we're not alone out here." Her breath released slowly. "Clarify," she said. "Footprints fresh. They were watching. They pulled back when we arrived." Evelyn closed her eyes. Not relief. Confirmation. "They're studying us," she said, "learning our rhythms, measuring response times." "And now?" Hayes asked quietly from behind her. "Now they know we don't panic." The team returned before dawn, tired, alert, alive. Dorn lingered after debrief, helmet tucked under his arm like a habit he hadn't grown out of yet. "Ma'am," he said, "you should have been there." She met his gaze. "You were." He didn't argue. That morning enemy chatter spiked, then collapsed. Not confusion. Decision. Analysts traced movement away from the region, assets pulled, routes abandoned mid-cycle. The pattern wasn't random. It was withdrawal. But Evelyn didn't celebrate. Withdrawal revealed something else. Finality. "They're not scared anymore," she told Hayes later that day. "They're done." "Isn't that what we want?" She shook her head. "Fear makes mistakes, closure makes plans." That night she walked the base again. Soldiers moved with a confidence that hadn't been there months earlier. Not bravado, belonging. She realized then that she wasn't just leading them. She was invested. And that frightened her more than any enemy ever had. Because caring meant vulnerability, and vulnerability had cost her everything once. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, she dreamed not of Dustlight, but of Fort Greystone under fire, different faces, same choices, same consequences waiting if she misread the moment. She woke before sunrise, heart heavy, mind clear. By mid-morning, the final message arrived. Intercepted, high priority. Spectre 6 remains, engagement not advised, sector to be abandoned permanently. Evelyn stared at the words longer than she needed to. Not pride. Relief. But relief carried its own weight. Because now the question wasn't whether the enemy would come back. It was whether she would stay. Hayes found her on the ridge that evening, watching the light fade. "You did what you came here to do," he said. She didn't answer right away. "I didn't come here to do anything," she said finally. "I came here to disappear." And now, she thought of the soldiers she'd trained, the trust they'd built, the way the base breathed differently now. "Now I'm not sure disappearing is the right ending." Hayes nodded. "There's an open slot, permanent, command advisory, your terms." She felt the old resistance rise, the instinct to refuse before attachment could take root. But she didn't say no. She didn't say yes either. She asked for time. That night Evelyn stood alone once more at the fence line. The ghosts were quieter now, not gone, never gone. But they no longer demanded she leave. They waited. And for the first time, she considered staying long enough to answer them. What if the final battle wasn't against the enemy, but against the part of yourself that still believed you didn't deserve to remain? Dawn came slowly over Fort Greystone, the kind of morning that didn't rush anyone. The mountains held onto shadow a little longer than usual, as if even they were reluctant to move on. Evelyn stood where she always did now, at the fence line, watching the light creep forward inch by inch. The enemy was gone. Not scattered, not regrouping. Gone. Intercepts confirmed it overnight. Assets pulled clean. Command nodes abandoned. Routes erased like they'd never existed. The sector wasn't contested anymore. It was avoided. Her call sign no longer appeared in panic or urgency, only in warnings never to return. Spectre 6 remained. And that somehow felt heavier than the fighting. She thought she would feel victorious, vindicated, restored. Instead, she felt quiet. The kind that asks questions. Soldiers began their day behind her, boots on gravel, muted voices, routine settling back into place. But the routine was different now. Sharper, intentional. The base moved like a unit that trusted itself. That was her doing. And the realization unsettled her more than any firefight ever had. She walked toward the training grounds as the sun cleared the ridge. The group was already forming, some stretching, others checking gear out of habit more than necessity. When they noticed her, no one snapped to attention. No one joked. They just waited. She stopped in front of them and, for the first time since returning to command, she hesitated. Not because she lacked words. Because words made things final. "I won't be running drills today," she said. A ripple of uncertainty moved through the line, not fear, concern. "I'm stepping back," she continued. "This base doesn't need me watching over every move anymore." Dorn shifted slightly, then stilled himself. He didn't interrupt. He'd learned that lesson well. Evelyn looked at them, really looked. Faces no longer defined by inexperience, but by growth, by attention, by the quiet confidence of people who knew how close things could come and chose discipline anyway. "You're ready," she said simply. She turned before anyone could respond. Because if she stayed another second, she might change her mind. The operations office felt smaller than it used to. Hayes stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't ask why she was there. "You made a decision," he said. "I made peace with one," she replied. He nodded. "You're staying." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. The word felt strange, solid, earned. She expected relief to follow. It didn't. What came instead was grief. Not sharp, not overwhelming. Just present. That afternoon, she visited the far edge of the base where the noise thinned and the wind carried memory more easily. She sat on a low concrete barrier and let herself remember Sable V, not as they died, but as they lived. Their humor, their arguments, the way they trusted her without needing reassurance. "I tried to disappear for you," she said softly to no one. "I thought that was what honor looked like." The wind answered by moving through the wire fence, humming low and steady. Staying, she realized, wasn't betrayal. It was continuation. As dusk settled, she found the patch still folded in her pocket. She kept it there all day, fingers brushing the stitching now and then like a habit she hadn't let go of yet. She sewed it back onto her uniform herself that night, slow, careful, each stitch deliberate. Not reclaiming the past, claiming the present. When she stepped outside afterward, the base lights glowed warm against the dark. Dorn stood nearby, waiting without announcing himself. "Ma'am," he said, then corrected himself. "Commander." She smiled, not fully but honestly. "You'll be taking point on the next rotation," she told him. His eyes widened just a fraction. "I won't disappoint you." "I know," she said. "You'll disappoint yourself first. That's how you'll know you're learning." He nodded, absorbing it the way he'd learned to absorb everything now. As he walked away, Evelyn looked back toward the mountains one last time. They stood unmoved, witnesses to everything that had passed through them and left something behind. She was Spectre 6 because the enemy feared her. She was Spectre 6 because she had learned how to live with the weight and still choose to stand. Sometimes strength doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it stays. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.